Are you retiring right now? Is that what you're saying?
You don't just say, hey, I'm going to take a while off, and maybe I'll be back, maybe I won't. You owe it to the fans, you owe it to that belt, you owe it to this company, and you owe it to Johnny Hendricks to give him that opportunity to fight again.
So it was all BS, you know. Dana kind of lied to me.
Belts in 2 weight classes, 9 successful title defenses at welterweight, and millions of dollars generated in revenue for the UFC. Isn't that enough to become the apple of the eye of Dana White and company? Of course it is, but then why does the UFC Supremo hate George Saint-Pierre? From a bullied kid to one of the greatest fighters of all time, George Saint-Pierre's story is one of the most iconic ones in MMA history. As a child, the French-Canadian was bullied for being different. He would often have his money and clothes stolen by schoolmates, until he decided to bounce back by joining a karate gym in Montreal and beating the brakes off his bullies within months. At 12, GSP was already a second dan black belt in Kyokushin karate, and at 20, he entered the world of professional fighting. GSP made a successful start to his career in 2002, winning his first 5 fights in a dominant fashion by dispatching 4 opponents in the first round and the 5th one in the second. In 2004, the rising star joined the UFC, and with only 2 wins under his belt, he earned a welterweight title shot against Matt Hughes, who submitted the inexperienced GSP with the second left in round 1. Being the stubborn little cookie that he was, GSP bounced back with 5 straight wins and captured the welterweight title in his 6th straight win, avenging his loss to Matt Hughes. In his first title defense, he paid a heavy price for underestimating Matt Serra, who won by first-round knockout. That was the second and the final loss on GSP's record. He bounced back a second time and absolutely decimated Serra to win the title before putting it on the line 9 times against some of the best fighters in the world, including John Fitch, BJ Penn, Nate Diaz, and Carlos Condit. Thanks to a dominant run from 2008 to 2013, Saint-Pierre was the biggest star in MMA in that time frame. He was the UFC's cash cow who was bringing in millions of dollars in revenue for the company, and he was Dana White's favorite fighter, but fell apart. At UFC 167, GSP battled the hard-hitting Hendricks, who pushed the French-Canadian to his absolute limit, with some even going as far as to say that Hendricks was robbed. With his face badly busted up, GSP announced that he was taking a break from the sport.
Are you retiring right now? Is that what you're saying? I have to go away for a little bit at least.
Now that was something Dana White still hasn't gotten over to this day, because his most lucrative cash cow left the sport without informing him beforehand, and most importantly, closing the door to a blockbuster rematch with Hendricks. Dana let it all out in the post-fight interview. First, he minced no words on who he thought won the fight.
Did you see George get smashed and hurt in the first round? It's about damage. He got hurt, he got wobbled, he got dropped. Yeah, I'm blown away that George Saint-Pierre won that fight.
And then he blasted GSP for leaving the division in limbo.
First of all, that decision that happens, right? You don't just say, hey, I'm going to take a while off, and maybe I'll be back, maybe I won't. You owe it to the fans, you owe it to that belt, you owe it to this company, and you owe it to Johnny Hendricks to give him that opportunity to fight again.
Right after the press conference, White and UFC owner Lorenzo Fertitta approached Saint-Pierre to persuade him to come back. In combat sports, fighters are often seen as commodities, but for White, Saint-Pierre was the main attraction. He was the last big star they had at that point in time, so they really needed him back, by hook or by crook, meaning that they completely disregarded the reasons why GSP wanted a break. He was mentally and physically burned out. A person with compassion would be concerned about Saint-Pierre's health, especially after a fight where he was obviously shaken up. But it appeared that White wasn't thinking about that at all. Yet there wasn't a whole lot he could do about it. After all, he firmly believes that when a fighter feels like retiring, they should most definitely do it. Saint-Pierre's break from MMA took longer than expected. From 2013 to 2017, he stayed away from the sport to heal physically as well as mentally before making his return to fighting in 2017, when he faced Michael Bisping for the UFC middleweight title. Before the fight, Dana White was asked whether GSP's fight was a one-off or was he going to defend the title if he won, and here's what the UFC Supremo said.
You think there's a chance he vacates that belt and goes to 170? Or I mean, there's a lot of monsters in that division.
I don't want to hear that.
185.
That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear he's going to defend his 85-pound title. That's the agreement we made. That's the deal we made when we made the deal.
The fight between GSP and Bisping took place at UFC 217, where the French-Canadian won by a rear-naked choke in the third round to become a two-division UFC champion, who was expected to defend to unify his belt against Robert Whittaker, but once again, Rush superstar left the UFC in limbo when he vacated the belt a few months later and retired from the sport. Dana wasn't happy, although he wasn't as furious this time around. Instead, he opted to be a little more careful and a whole lot manipulative. A year after GSP beat Michael Bisping, Khabib Nurmagomedov won the lightweight title, and guess who he called out? Saint-Pierre was down for a fight because he loved the challenge of facing an undefeated phenom who was mauling everybody that crossed paths with him. But there was one tiny problem. GSP was too big for the 155-pound lightweight, where Nurmagomedov was the champion, and he wanted to fight at 165 pounds.
As of what I understand right now, there is no 165. It's a maybe, from what I understand. It's a rumor, I should say. And if that happens, I think it would be very interesting for George. And I'm hoping that rumor is true.
Anyone in particular we're looking forward to?
I think the best matchup would be for sure Khabib.
Dana didn't initially show interest in the battle between the two phenoms until Oscar De La Hoya, the man White hates more than the hefty fighter paychecks, challenged GSP to a charity boxing match. Unfortunately, GSP wasn't allowed to compete by the UFC since his contract with the promotion was active up until that point. UFC denying GSP the NOC to fight De La Hoya was a hypocritical move, given the fact that they granted permission to other former UFC fighters like Ben Askren and Chad Mendes to do high-profile excursions in non-MMA bouts. When asked why, Dana told GSP that he was only trying to protect him.
At first, he refused. Then he thought about it, but he came back with the argument that, oh, now it's not because he thinks Oscar gonna win. He thinks it's because he doesn't like the fact that Triller take me and make money out of my back, even while I'm still under contract with UFC.
To win GSP over, Dana put forward Khabib's name on the table, even though the Russian had retired by then. All of it sounded strange to GSP, who knew exactly what Dana was trying to do, to manipulate him.
Then he came back and he asked me if I wanted to fight Khabib. And I told Dana, I said, that's very strange. Why you didn't want to do the fight when we asked you few years ago? Why is it now? And you know what I mean? He said, yeah, because Khabib was not retired and he was not the same guy that he was. Now it all makes sense.
Maybe it was because Dana didn't have faith in GSP to do the right thing anymore. But that doesn't mean he undermines the man's greatness at every given opportunity. After all, how could a man with 5 title defenses be bigger and better than a man with a record 9?
Yeah, I don't think there's any denying that he's the greatest welterweight of all time.
The reality is, Dana White is used to having his way with fighters. So when someone stands up for themselves and tells the UFC to stay in its lane, Dana does his best to demonize them. Take Francis Ngannou, for example. The moment he walked out the door, Dana insinuated that he was afraid of fighting John Jones. Just a couple of years before that, he was talking about how Francis Ngannou is an absolute monster who hits like a Ford Escort truck. GSP had it the same way. He was once the UFC's biggest star, but then he prioritized himself over the promotion, and it all went south. Nevertheless, it is what it is. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and turn on those notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.